Welcome to our annual gala honoring In These Times' 45th anniversary. My name is Rick Perlstein. I'm In These Times board president. I'm an author and a journalist, and most importantly, my very first publication in a national magazine in 1995 was in These Times. I was dear friends with In These Times founder, Jimmy Weinstein, and I'm incredibly proud and pleased to help extend the legacy of this beloved institution for another 45 years. First off, I want to thank our host committee. These are people who've pledged at least $1,000. I can't name all of them because, blessedly, that would take too much time. But I did want to single one out. A gentleman named Pete Rosenblum, who's 94 years old. Pete's daughter, Beth, told us that Jimmy Weinstein, ITT's founder, was the person who introduced her parents to each other. So she thought it was appropriate for In These Times to be honored. And last Sunday, they honored her mother's memory on the occasion of their 25th anniversary of her death. And Beth reports that they celebrate that ITT is still alive and kicking. It's, in fact, doing splendidly well. I hope you guys will tune in at inthesetimes.com often. If you're not a subscriber, I hope you'll become one. I think Mr. Rosenblum exemplifies the spirit of this institution that we celebrate tonight. I think more than any other publication, we are a community. We're a community that joins the activists we cover who are trying to change the world, the people who produce it on Milwaukee Avenue, and you, our readers. And these are overlapping communities. And of course, we also want to celebrate the 7,000 of our readers who are also donors, which is really an incredibly high ratio for a publication of a circulation of about $32,000 people. We're here to raise money, but we're also here to learn. And we're also here to collectively learn in order to change the world. That's what this institution is all about. So I'm going to start out by noting that on the events page, there's a link that you can use to donate. We don't have advertisements online. We've made a pledge never to have advertisements online. So the kind of support we get from our readers is absolutely essential to the work that we do. We are an independent organization. We are beholden to no corporation. And that's the way we insist on having it. That's the only way to do the kind of journalism that challenges the powers that be and builds a more just world. I have an exciting announcement to make. Thanks to my publisher, Simon & Schuster, the first 45 donors tonight at any level in honor of the 45th anniversary of In These Times will get a free copy of my recent book, Reaganland, signed by me. So I hope that, that will spur some of you who, weren't quite ready to make the leap to become one of our supporters. I think we're ready. Congratulations to the team for pulling this all together. I have the incredible honor of introducing one of the heroes of the movement for justice, not only in America, for the world. There's no way I can properly introduce this guy, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to mention one thing. One of Noam Chomsky's most extraordinary achievements is speaking about the imperative of radical change in language that any ordinary person can understand, which is something we really aspire to accomplish in These Times. He is an original founding sponsor of In These Times, going all the way back to 1976. And I am just so honored to be able to turn the floor over to him. Are we ready yet? Okay, we're having a little technical difficulty. So I am, okay. Wow. Professor Chomsky, how are you doing tonight? Where do we reach you?
Lots of technical difficulties, but I expect that.
Here you are now.
Just came off a couple of hours in Australia. So,
Wow. Well, welcome to Chicago. And I'll just turn the floor over to you. Why don't you tell us about your relationship to In These Times?
well, it's pretty simple. I think I've read every issue since the first one, invariably gaining something important from it, learning something I didn't know, gaining a perspective that I really hadn't thought of. That's a valuable way of rethinking about the world. That's without exception. Right now, it's played a very important role in all the developments through these years. And right now, I think it's more important than it ever was, because we are facing very harsh times. Now, we don't have a lot of time to deal with the problems that are arising. I'm sure you've all seen, you recall, I'm sure, that during the election campaign, the basic slogan was dump Trump, challenge Biden. Well, we're not done with either. Trump is removed temporarily, still owns the Republican organization. I hesitate to call it a party because it's lost any pretense of participating in parliamentary politics. Perhaps maybe the lowest level it's reached, though it's hard to find one, was just a couple of days ago. You recall that Trump, one of his last acts was to completely sell out the population of Afghanistan. I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about the population. He was eager to get credit for withdrawing the troops, so he made an arrangement with the Taliban, which basically said, do anything you like to the Afghan people. We don't care. They're unpeople, not our concern. Just don't shoot at American troops because that won't look good for me. The Republican organization praised this as a historic triumph. They all took their trips to Mar-a-Lago to shine his shoes, get the blessing from the master, until about a month ago, when they suddenly removed all of this from their website so that they could now turn to blaming Biden for the catastrophe that they had created and lauded, even calling for impeachment. The cynicism and cowardice is just beyond words, and that's what we're facing. They're not gone. They may come back next year, and then what follows, I don't want to think about. That's dumping Trump. What about challenging Biden? Well, his domestic policies have been better than I expected, but unfortunately, they're almost impossible. It's almost impossible that they'll pass through 100% ironclad Republican opposition and many defections from right-wing Democrats. So they're nice, but I'm afraid we're not going to see them. International policy, not so good. Let's go back to the IPCC report that came out a couple of weeks ago. Came out on a Monday. Turned to Tuesday. It was dire warnings that we have to get rid of fossil fuels starting right away. Next day, Tuesday, Biden issued a call to OPEC, the major oil producing cartel, asking them to increase oil production because he wanted to see gas prices reduced in the United States. That would help him out in his electoral prospects. Well, it's one thing, we're not the only example where we have to challenge Biden and fast. There are others. The second major threat that we face comparable to destruction of the environment is the growing threat of nuclear war, increased under Trump with dismantling what was left almost entirely of the arms control regime, creating new, advanced, and more dangerous weapons, and undertaking dangerous, provocative moves towards China. Biden's picked it up and extended them. The only good thing we can say is that he did manage to rescue the last arms control agreement, no start agreement, at the last minute, hours before it was to expire. But the rest, all the same. More provocation towards China, more development of nuclear weapons, more of the incredibly bloated military budget dwarfing anyone else, and more of a harm to us than to anyone. It's completely obvious that we have to cooperate with China. We have to, if there's to be survival. There's no choice. Provocation, sending an armada into the South China Sea when there are opportunities to negotiate, is insane. Raising provocations with Taiwan is crazy. Developing a space war is beyond insanity. It's all going on. Has to stop. Like what China did. We don't like lots of things that they do. I don't like lots of things that we do. But there has to be moves towards cooperation. All the problems that are there can be addressed peacefully through negotiations and diplomacy. And that's also true of Afghanistan. That's one of the lesser of the many problems, but a serious one. China has a border with Afghanistan. They're far more concerned than we are with potential terrorist threats from Afghanistan, Turkic forces that are carrying out terrorist actions in their western borders could be based in Afghanistan. This bases plenty of grounds for cooperation in moving towards some kind of settlement which will save the Afghans from the worst of the current
yes.
disaster.
I can think of articles in our recent issues, one by our board member, Toby Chow, that addresses all these issues that have to do with China, in much in consonance with what you say, and an absolutely brilliant article by our editor-publisher, Joel Blyfus, comparing the possibility that our settlement in Afghanistan will resemble the Versailles Treaty if we revert to the typical kind of sanction regime that will just set up conditions for another war. I'm so grateful for your participation. If you've read every issue, that means you've read dozens of my articles, so that just absolutely makes my day. I hope you'll tune in for the rest. We have an amazing discussion coming with Bill McKibben, and I send you off in solidarity, brother. Thank you so very kindly. I want you to tune in because I'm incredibly proud to introduce a film in which you'll meet some of the staff and my board colleagues. They've performed astonishingly well under some very trying circumstances during the year of COVID. Most importantly and most remarkably, I think almost historically, we turned over an entire issue, the conception of the issue, the writing of the issue, the editing of the issue, to Black Lives Matters activists. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. The idea of In These Times is a community of activists, of writers, and of readers. And our raffle tonight, second prize is a signed version of the cover art. So I'm going to turn it over to the staff of In These Times so you can meet them.
In These Times was founded on the belief that movements are important, and the people who lead those movements need a media that informs, orients, and educates them.
Each day, I work to assign and conceptualize stories that fit into our goals to help to build a vibrant left and to put forward the demands of social movements on the ground that are organizing to build a more equitable and just world.
We also expose injustice, whether it's exploitation in the workplace, whether it's massacres that the US military has committed in Afghanistan. We try to do really hard-hitting reporting that challenges some of the most unjust and powerful forces in our world today.
It's one of the few places where you can read stories about the working class, about climate change, about income inequity, and in a way that is untarnished by corporate interests and the political views of fat cats.
Independent progressive journalism is important to me because corporate mainstream media leaves a lot out for the left, and for me as somebody who's been engaged in social movement work and movement building for a long time, it's really important that we are building some of our own institutions that are more accountable.
I think the one thing that In These Times does particularly well and an important role it plays is it helps connect young activists with activists of the past who have been through many of these struggles before. In These Times began covering what was called global warming back then in the late 1980s. The issue was just beginning to gain traction among some scientists at NASA who raised the alarm. I remember a cover story back in 1988 was Endless Simmer. That was more than 30 years ago, and the public understanding of the threat we now face is widespread.
In These Times has been reader supported for 45 years. And what that means to me is we are not taking money or we're not influenced by corporations or billionaire owners. We are looking to our readers, looking to our subscribers and our donors for whatever it is that they can give.
It's incredibly important right now for independent media, specifically nonprofit media in the progressive sphere, to be a strong voice. In These Times serves as a great corrective to the corporate media structure, while also lifting up voices that aren't traditionally heard in those outlets and putting movement demands front and center, and movement candidates, giving them the type of coverage they so rarely get. Thank you all for listening and for supporting In These Times, and I hope you will continue to do so for years to come.
In These Times is a place that has been there from day one and has been there for decades and will continue to do this with your help. So if you believe in the labor movement itself and its goals, supporting In These Times is a good way to contribute to that.
If you care about the left, if you care about movement building, if you care about supporting left social movements, you should support In These Times and other organizations like In These Times, because they're critical. They're a critical part of building a strong and robust left.
And In These Times was established to make people understand that there is a different way, that we collectively can pursue a future where everybody's value as a human being is recognized and protected. This is a generational struggle that we're going through. Things don't happen overnight, but they happen over decades. And In These Times has been around for 45 years, and we plan to be around for another 45.
Wow, I'm kind of getting goosebumps. I really love these people. So I got to make a pitch for donations. These guys work incredibly hard for much lower amounts of money than they could be making in other professions or other parts of the journalistic world. They get there early, they stay late, they skip their vacations, and they shouldn't have to. So this is why you need to give. If you go to the event page, you can hit the link. Moving on, I'm incredibly honored to be able to announce our featured speaker. Joel mentioned that our first global warming cover story was in the late 80s, but it was far from our last. In 2019, we devoted an entire issue to global warming, and the cover story was by our speaker, Bill McKibben. And now I'm going to let you know on a trade secret. When people give speeches, the people who introduce them usually just kind of read the biography that they send in. And the biography that Bill sent in is conspicuously modest. It reads, Bill McKibben is an author, environmentalist, and activist. In 1988, he wrote The End of Nature, the first book for a common audience about global warming. He is co-founder and senior advisor at 350.org, an international climate change campaign that works in 188 countries around the world. But It's much more than that. All of us activists, writers, and editors hope to work some kind of progressive change in the world. And Bill is one of the rare writers to actually accomplish it. In 2009, 350.org organized 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. He was named Foreign Policy Magazine's inaugural list of the 100 most important global thinkers. The next year, he held events in over 7,000 events in over 188 countries. He won the Gandhi Peace Awards. And according to Wikipedia, I'm going to click on so I can see him blush. He has been mentioned as a possible future Secretary of the Interior or Secretary of Energy should a progressive be elected president. That's an open question whether we elected a progressive president, but who knows? There's still time, and all that, and his sentences and his paragraphs and his pages are superlative, which is one of the most incredible accomplishments of all. He's a living embodiment of the institutional goals of In These Times. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill McKibben.
Well, Rick, what a pleasure to get to join everybody. I like birthday parties, I gotta say. 45 is young by my standards, but what the heck? It means you've got lots of open road ahead of you, and we badly need you there. I gotta say, in a celebratory mood tonight. I have refrained from having beer yet because I knew I was coming to do this, but about an hour ago, we got the news that the richest university in the world, Harvard University, is finally, after a decade-long effort by thousands and thousands and thousands of activists, divested from fossil fuel. This campaign that Naomi Klein and I started about a decade ago, which is in some measures grown into the biggest anti-corporate campaign ever. We're at about $15 trillion now in endowments and portfolios that have divested. But Harvard was one of the biggest. And so I confess I'm in a good mood for many reasons tonight. And it's such a reminder that of all the virtues that activists can have, perseverance is number one, because that's actually what it takes. Not tweets. It takes, though Twitter can be part of it, it takes perseverance. And we're going to need a lot of it in the time ahead. So let me just for a minute interrupt the celebratory mood and talk about exactly where we are, because where we are is at the most difficult pitch that human beings have ever found themselves in. And it's going to take an extraordinary amount of great effort to get us out of it. Climate change, the climate crisis, is an astonishing danger now. The things that we were warning about 30 years ago are now the things that are on the front page of every newspaper every day. In fact, 3 or 4 hours ago, the National Weather Service announced that the summer in the U.S. this year was hotter than the summer in 1936, the height of the Dust Bowl that used to be hold the record. We've seen what that means. Even those of us on the East Coast have had seen the smoke drifting across the continent from the great fires in the Pacific Northwest. I was in Manhattan a week ago, yesterday, I guess, when the enormous rainstorms at the tail end of Hurricane Ida inundated the city, breaking the record for the biggest rainfall in New York history, a record that had been set 11 days before. 2020 was the hottest year we've ever had on this planet so far, but of course that record won't hold for long, because now we're fully into the global warming era. So far, human beings have raised the temperature of the Earth 1 degree Celsius. That doesn't sound like so much. If it's 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, if that's changes between when you go out for lunch and come in afterwards, your body won't notice the difference. But the planet can tell the difference because it's aggregated across such a vast area. So let's use different units of measurement to really get this across. The extra heat that we trap near the surface of the planet every day because of the coal and gas and oil that we've burned, is the heat equivalent of 400,000 Hiroshima-sized explosions. When you think about it in those terms, it's easier to understand how we've done things like melt the ice, most of the ice across the Arctic, taken a continent-sized, eons-old, meters-thick sheet of ice and reduced it to slush. It's easy to understand how it is we've managed to affect the operation of the jet stream and of the Gulf Stream, of the most fundamental systems on planet Earth. And that's with 1 degree. Here's the danger part of the story. We're still early on in this saga. If we keep on our current trajectory, even if we kept all the promises we made in Paris, we would increase the temperature of the planet 3 degrees Celsius, 5-6 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. If we do that, then we do not get to have civilizations anything like the ones that we've been handed by our forebears. There's just too much chaos and flux and violence in those numbers. They're just too much change for us to handle. Already we sense the limits of our ability as we see storm and flood play out over and over and over again. Just to give you one example, the iron law of climate change is the less you did to cause it, the sooner and the harder you get hit by it. It's the most unfair thing that we've ever managed to do, which is saying a lot when you think about colonialism and imperialism and every other thing that we've managed to foist on the world. Last year, the biggest hurricane season in Atlantic history, we got deep into the Greek alphabet. We ran out of letters. And so the last 2 storms of the year that came late in November, and they were big, we didn't really pay much attention to them because they didn't hit the US. They hit Central America. In fact, they hit 10 days apart, about 10 miles apart on the coast of Nicaragua, and they expended much of their violence on Honduras and Guatemala. And that damage was extraordinary. We think that the damage in Honduras may have been equivalent to 40% of GDP. By contrast, the worst storm we ever had in this country, Katrina, did damage equivalent to about 1% of GDP. So what do you know? There's a lot of people on the move from Honduras and Guatemala. You can't farm if there's no road to take your produce to market, no bridge to take it across to town. You can't farm if there's a foot of sand on your field now. Those people are going to show up at our border, many of them. I don't know what their legal status is going to be, but I can tell you what their moral status is. They didn't do a damn thing to cause climate change. The 4% of the human population that lives in the United States has contributed 25% of the carbon in the atmosphere. We're the league champions by a huge margin. And so we have an extraordinary burden that we will not be able to fulfill, even in the best of intentions, if we let things get much more out of hand. The UN High Commission on Refugees has estimated that unchecked global warming could produce 1 billion climate refugees in the course of this century. We cannot let that happen. So in between the 1 degree we are now and the 3 degrees that we're headed towards, our job, and it's the biggest job that humans have ever faced, is to somehow hold that number to 2 degrees or maybe 1.5 degrees. That's not a good outcome. If 1 degree melts the Arctic, we're fools to find out what 2 will do, but it's where we're going, even if we really work hard at this point. And it is therefore the most noble task that humans have yet undertaken, to try and do that on behalf of everyone and everything that will follow us. Now, that's all depressing. So let me give you the better news, which is that we understand much more now how we could do some of this, how we might have some hope of it. In the last 10 years, 2 things have happened that are really important. One is that great engineers have dramatically reduced the cost of renewable energy, cut it by 90%. Solar power and wind power are now the cheapest ways to produce power on planet Earth. And so there's no longer a technological or economic obstacle to getting done what needs doing. But of course, that doesn't mean there aren't obstacles. There are. One of them is inertia, and the other, even more powerful, is vested interest. The extraordinary insistence of the fossil fuel industry that they keep their business model going even at the cost of breaking the planet. We know, in fact, and it's thanks to great reporting, and it's one of the reasons that journalism is so key here, and that the work of places like In These Times is so crucial. We know from great investigative reporting now that the fossil fuel industry knew all along what was coming. That back in the 1980s, when I was writing The End of Nature, scientists at Exxon were sending memos off one after another to the senior brass, telling them what was going on. In fact, they predicted with uncanny accuracy what the temperature would be in 2020. And they were believed. The CEOs, the execs, started doing things like building all their drilling rigs higher because they knew that the sea level was going to be rising. What they didn't do was tell any of the rest of us. Instead, they spent billions of dollars across this industry building an architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that kept us locked for 30 years in a completely sterile debate about whether or not climate change was real. A debate that both sides knew the answer to at the start. It's just one of them was willing to lie. And that became the most consequential lie in human history because it cost us time. And time is the one thing that we do not have. This is a timed test in a way that no political challenge has been before. Dr. King used to say at the end of talks, quoting from the Massachusetts abolitionist Theodore Parker, he would say, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." This may take a while, but we're going to win, which is a very comforting thing for the brave people of the civil rights movement. Well, the bad news is the arc of the physical universe is short and it bends toward heat. And if we don't win soon, then we do not win. So, winning slowly is just another way of losing. That's why the other important development of the last 10 years, alongside that epic science and engineering, was the epic movement building that people have engaged in. And Rick kindly talked about 350.org, which 12 years ago or so I started with 7 college students, and it was a kind of first iteration of a global grassroots climate movement. And we have had the great fun of organizing in every country on earth except, I guess, North Korea, and taking on the Keystone Pipeline and launching the divestment movement and on and on and on. But the best thing that's happened is that so many others have flooded into this space too. And it's been beautiful, beautiful, beautiful to watch that happen. In this country, we've seen the remarkable work of the Sunrise Movement, which brought us the Green New Deal. Many of these people, most of them, had cut their teeth on divestment campaigning in college, and then afterwards they wanted to keep going. So they started the Sunrise Movement, and out of that has grown the Green New Deal. And out of that, really, has grown this remarkable $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill now on the table in Congress. If it passes, it will be the first real effort to do anything about climate change in the 30 years that we've known about it in the US Congress. It'll also be social legislation on a scale we haven't seen since the Great Society, perhaps since the New Deal. It is unbelievably important. I was out on Sunday in Vermont, crisscrossing the state with Bernie, speechifying on its behalf, and he's been out all across the country, nothing could be more important. It's not just the Sunrise Movement. We've seen the remarkable involvement of young people, really young people, junior high and high school students who are now in the forefront of all of this. You all know about Greta Thunberg, and you should. Greta Thunberg is great. I love her. She's one of my favorite people to work with. She couldn't be more remarkable. But I think she'd be the first to say that the real news, the real good news, is that there are 10,000 Greta Thunbergs, and they have 10 million followers. I mean, junior high school kids are absolutely on fire. Why do you think Harvard divested tonight? Because every single kid who's applying to college now understands the fix we're in and won't take the kind of dumb both-siderism that people have engaged in for too long. And it's beautiful to watch all this happening. I'll tell you just a tiny bit about the effort we're just beginning to launch, kind of soft launching at the moment. Since young people are fully engaged, it's time for those of us who aren't so young to be fully backing them up. We're going to be launching this thing called thirdact.org for people over the age of 60. Because, for many of us, the first acts of our lives were pretty interesting. We participated in, or at least witnessed, the great social transformations of the civil rights and women's war movement. The second act, maybe a little more attention to our roles as consumers than our roles as citizens, but we emerge now into our third and final act with skills, resources, maybe grandchildren, and a great desire not to leave the world a worse place than we found it, which is what we're on course to do. And so when young people do things like, say, this fall, take on the banks that finance the fossil fuel industry, they'll do a great job, but they need us behind them. Chase Bank has given more money to the fossil fuel industry than any bank on earth. So at the end of October, when young people are rallying outside its gates, that'll be fantastic. And it'll even be more fantastic if some of us older people who are more likely, maybe sadly, to have some money in their vaults are rallying there too and backing them up. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's going to take everybody. It's going to take everybody getting outside their comfort zone, because the planet is 1.5 miles outside its comfort zone. And so we need everybody pitching in really serious ways. And that includes, and here let me get back to the real topic at hand, that includes journalists. For many years, the coverage of climate change was a complete disaster. I'm a journalist by training and inclination. My first job was at the New Yorker out of college, writing talk of the town. I've grown up in newspapers, and it's a profession that I hold very dear. But all its weaknesses were exposed by the climate question for many, many years, as journalists struggled to take their sense of balance and apply it to a situation where one side was simply lying. That's gotten much better in the last few years, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and things are doing an increasingly better job of getting the message across. But we need this other kind of journalism too, the engaged journalism that a place like In These Times can provide. A place where we talk not only about what's happening, but unashamedly and unembarrassedly about what we're going to do about it and how we're going to do it. A place to come together, plan, think, motivate, engage. And that's been, for me, a kind of important realization. It took me too long to figure out that that's what we needed to do. The first 10 years after I wrote The End of Nature, because I'm a writer, I think, I thought that we were engaged in an argument, and that if we kept writing more books and having more symposiums and more journal articles and things, eventually the pile of data and evidence would get so high that the powers that be would do what they had to do. Well, it didn't take that long, 2 or 3, 4 years, into the mid-1990s, before it was very clear we'd won the argument. The science was utterly not in doubt. Scientists had reached a robust, powerful consensus. But that didn't mean much. We'd won the argument, but we were losing the fight. because the fight wasn't about data and reason. The fight was about what fights are usually about, money and power. And so that's why we had to start organizing and building big movements like 350 or Third Act or the Sunrise Movement or any of the others, in order to obtain some of the power through, through passion and spirit and creativity that the oil industry gains through just having a lot of cash. And that fight requires engaged journalism of the kind that In These Times exemplifies. It requires people who understand that there are really powerful ways to tell stories that are directly about contributing to that fight, about picking a side and standing with it and throwing weight behind it. And so I'm extraordinarily grateful for all the work that In These Times has done for so long, and extraordinarily cognizant of the fact that it needs lots of support to keep doing that work in the time ahead. It is not an easy moment for journalism, but it is a vital moment for journalism. And so, Rick, I just could not be more grateful for the work that you and your colleagues do day in and day out. It really matters, and all of us are the better for it.
So kindly, Bill. I think that really speaks what it means to be a radical organizer. You have to have the courage to face apocalyptic possibilities, but you also have to have the will to fight them with love and with joy and with hope. And you're a real model for that. Now, before we move on, a lot of you guys know me as a scholar of right-wing organizing and how they organize to change the world with such baleful consequences. We're giving away free copies of my most recent book, Reaganland, to the first 45 donors. I'll be signing them. And we have many more to give away. So please click the link on the event page, give a donation, support this work that we're doing. And moving on in the program, here at In These Times, we don't take anything at face value. We argue. And to lead that argument and discussion, we have a remarkable interlocutor, someone who is truly in the trenches of these struggles, studying and organizing resource fights among Native Americans. Jessica Koski is an Anishinaabe Ojibwe from the Kewaunee Bay Indian community located in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. She's a former editorial board member for Rural America In These Times, and she's an incoming doctoral student. And she's going to be leading a discussion that you can participate in. There's going to be a dialogue box on the page, and we hope you'll pose questions too. Thank you. Jessica, you ready to go?
Yes, we do. I'm really honored to be here today and a part of this event and to be able to interview and have this conversation with you, Bill. Thank you for all of your work that you do. So our first question is, what is climate concerns these days, and how has your approach to the climate crisis developed over time?
Well, that's a very good question. I think the easiest way to say it is that, when we began, we were talking about things that were going to happen. And that may be really the place where you need writers the most, because if you can't yet take a picture of something or, shoot film of it or whatever, then you have to be able to figure out how to foretell it in ways that will allow people to do the difficult task of planning ahead, preparing. And we tried very hard to do that, and with some success. I can't complain about, my books got widely read and widely published. I think The End of Nature was in 25 languages. But it wasn't enough to stand up to the extraordinary onslaught that the fossil fuel industry unleashed. That 30 years of just straight up lying did almost unbelievable damage. You can almost measure it. In 1988, the Republican president of the United States George H.W. Bush, on receiving the news of what we then called the greenhouse effect, said, well, we will fight the greenhouse effect with the White House effect, which is a pretty good line, actually, you got to admit. And a signal that at least, like rational people were going to go to work. 30 years of endless lying later, the witless Republican president of the United States, Donald Trump, was declaring that climate change was a hoax manufactured by the Chinese. An idea so nuts that if you were sitting next to somebody on a bus and they started muttering it, you'd get up and change your seat, But that's what happens when you have unlimited money to spread unlimited lies, as I was saying, a lot of our work had to be about figuring out how to take apart and stand up to that disinformation and stand up to the people telling it. And I will say that I think that in certain ways it's been quite successful. A decade ago, Exxon was still the biggest company on earth. And now it's not even the biggest energy company. In market cap, it's being passed by some of the renewable providers. Its political power isn't broken yet, but it's reduced. And you can tell by the fact that, say, when Joe Biden ran for president, and this is not someone who'd spent his whole career worrying about climate change, but the polling and the zeitgeist had shifted to the point where he was running on climate change, and where he said at the end of the last debate that the time had come to transition away from the oil industry. That was a big thing for a presidential contender to say, and very good news that he won the presidency having said it, because it demonstrated that you could touch that kind of third rail and get away with it. So we're definitely making progress. The problem is that this is a timed test. The scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us in 2018 that we needed to have cut emissions in half by 2030 if we had any hope of reaching the targets that we'd set at Paris just 6 years ago. And I got to tell you, 2030 is now 8 years and change away. So we have our work cut out for us.
Thank you. So the next question, how do mainstream and corporate media cover climate change? How are they improving or failing to frame the climate change in the news?
So increasingly, as I was saying, I think they cover it better than they used to, especially at the kind of elite outlets. So the New York Times and the Washington Post, which were not good for many years, have in recent years been really quite good. And so you regularly see headlines now on the front page of the Times saying, drought driven by climate change, decimating Western agriculture, or something like that. And that's precisely what we need to keep driving home people's understanding. The real problem is that it's often not covered much, and that's especially true on television. And the numbers are always staggering. When groups like Media Matters or whatever added up at the end of the year, it turns out that ABC or NBC or whatever will have devoted 7 minutes or something in the course of the year's news coverage to talking about climate change, the single most important thing that biggest thing that humans have ever done. And so that failure to put it front and center all the time, to make people understand that it is the background to almost everything that's happening on our Earth, that continues to be a serious journalistic failure. I do want to shout out the tremendous investigative reporters who have brought us from places like Inside Climate News, the LA Times, Columbia Journalism School, the ones who did a lot to uncover those stories about the fossil fuel industry, knowing everything about climate change. And I do want to shout out the remarkable data reporters at many institutions who are figuring out how to take weather statistics or things like that, and tell stories in ways that were unimaginable even a few years ago. So there's a lot of, I'm very grateful for this, because for many years, I felt very alone in this work. There was a period of time in the 90s, maybe early aughts, when if there was a big story about climate change in the US press, there was a altogether too good chance that it was written by me. And that's not a healthy situation. So I am every day grateful for the fact that there are more and more people covering it. But I don't think that that in any way lessens the importance of the particular kind of coverage that we get out of the alternative media that allows movements to tell stories on their own terms. Because that's vitally, vitally important to this work.
Thank you. So the next question is, so through your work, your articles in your books, you often make the connections between climate change and other injustices that are affecting people of color, immigrants, and indigenous peoples who are often on the front lines. So could you speak a bit about why it is important that the climate movement focus on justice rather than just technological approaches?
Absolutely. As I said before, the bottom line here is that this is the most unjust thing we ever figured out how to do. And so if only for that reason, it would be crucial. But it's also really crucial because these are the people who are really leading the resistance and so much of the fight. Frontline communities, and in particular, I would say in the last 5 years, an extraordinary leadership from indigenous communities around the world. People saw some of that at Standing Rock, but it surprised many people. It didn't surprise me because I knew an awful lot of those people who'd been working for years on these questions, and in the years since have gone on to do even more, not just here, but all over the world, in Australia, in the South Pacific, everywhere we see this kind of remarkable leadership. Right now, the hottest fight in the continent is at Line 3, along the headwaters of the Mississippi in northern Minnesota, and it's being led by leaders like Tara Huska or Winona LaDuke, remarkable indigenous women who are doing an incredible job. When we look at Louisiana, where Hurricane Ida just struck, we see the incredible leadership of frontline communities from Cancer Alley, across into New Orleans. We look at pioneers like Robert Bullard, who really taught us about environmental racism 40 years ago, lessons that are now powerfully sinking in. And you can tell how much all this is sinking in because really maybe the best part, or one of them, of that huge infrastructure bill, the kind of Green New Deal inspired bill that Bernie is trying so hard to get through, one of the best parts of it is that it takes something like 40% of the funding that it gives out and directs it to the most vulnerable communities, which is very new. We're in the business usually in our federal government of rewarding those who already have. And it's high time in all these counts that we reverse that. And it's why I really think the most important thing that progressives can do in the next 30 or 40 days is figure out how to back Bernie to the hilt and get this done.
Great, thank you. So this next question is in regard to the next phase of your journey, analyst and environmental leader. Can you tell us what to expect?
Well, it's just, it's kind of you to ask, and I was sort of alluding to it a little bit with this work we're doing at Third Act, and trying to get older people fully engaged. And just on the offhand chance that there might be a couple of older people in the audience tonight, I was thinking today, because it's almost exactly 10 years ago, about the start of the fight over the Keystone Pipeline. And I wrote the letter in 2011 asking people to come to DC to get arrested outside the White House at the start of that fight. And it was a successful letter. It turned into the biggest civil disobedience action in many years about anything in this country. But one of the things I said in it was, I did not think that young people should actually be the cannon fodder for this particular demonstration, that if you were 19 or 20, it's possible that an arrest record was not the best thing for your resume. Whereas one of the few unmixed blessings, Jessica, of growing older is past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? And so, it was with great pleasure that I saw people with hairlines like mine arriving. We did not ask people as they were getting arrested, how old are you? Because that seems rude. But we did say, cleverly, I think, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. And on the last day of this protest, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was so old he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was long enough ago, truthfully, I'd almost sort of forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. It was great. The young people who were there got to see their elders acting the way that we need elders kind of acting. Outside their comfort zone. Not everybody has to go to jail, but everybody has to dig in far, far, far more. Because, because who wants to be the first ones to really leave the world in much worse shape than we found it, that would be a bad thing. And so I'm very hopeful that there'll be older people rallying behind the leadership of younger people to get some of this done now in the next little while. We shall see, but it's fun to imagine. And I will add that I have had a surprising number of people come up to me, older people who say that it's on their bucket list to get arrested, and could I help them? And I will say I will do my best to expedite that request for anyone who's really the need.
Awesome. Activism work was actually in close partnership with older generations. They seem to also have a lot more time on their hands when you're retired.
There's that too. Exactly right. Yeah.
So I have one more question, and then we'll get to a few questions from the audience as well. What can humanity do to change course, and why is it important for people to wake up and take an honest look at climate change now?
Say that one more time. You broke up just for a minute at the beginning.
What can humanity do to change course, and why is it important for people to wake up and take an honest look at climate change now?
That's just the right question. Look, climate change is, in the end, a math problem. The problem is that we're pouring carbon into the atmosphere, mostly by burning coal and gas and oil. And so we've got to stop doing it. And that means we have to find something else to power our lives. We could and should use less energy. But the energy that we use, a way to think about it or to say it is, we need to stop burning stuff here on the surface of the earth, coal, gas, oil, wood. And we need instead to rely on the fact that the good Lord was kind enough to put a large burning sphere 93 million miles away, and we know how to exploit it for solar power and wind power. And that's a great discovery, and one that we need to take fully on board. And we could, and eventually we will, 75 years from now, the planet will run on sun and wind because it's so cheap. But if it takes us 75 years or even 25 years to get there, the planet that runs on it will be a broken planet. So we have to move very quickly now. And you're just right to ask that question, because time is the key variable. And the thing that's slowing us down more than any other is the continued political power of people who want to keep doing what we're doing. So, for instance, this climate bill that Bernie and others have put forward, this $3.5 trillion for climate, for education, for housing, for healthcare. The Washington Post last week revealed that all the biggest corporations in America are busy fighting it because it would raise their tax rate a couple of percentage points. All these companies like Apple or Walmart or FedEx or whatever that have been taking out ads for years to tell us how mortally concerned they are about the fate of the earth and diversity and so on and so forth. If they put a price of even a little bit of money on it, instantly they're backing away. And so that's precisely the kind of power that we need to assemble, the kind of power that can stand up to that kind of corporate strength. That's why we build movements. They've got money, we've got bodies. That's the fight.
Great. Yeah. And related to that, and it was one of the questions on my screen, and hopefully I'm not getting feedback and that was just me. I think it's better now. Was related to kind of the success of the divestment campaigning. Are you seeing that have like a real effect at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you ever turned on the TV at night and skipping down the channel, seen that nutty guy, Jim Cramer, who's the like stock picker on the TV, the America's biggest authority on what stocks to buy, waves his hands a lot, shouts about things. Last year, he devoted a couple of nights of his show to explaining why it was that people just even shouldn't bother trying to make money on oil stocks anymore. So the divestment movement's just gotten too big. There's just too many people who won't do it. So, and the oil companies understand this at the deepest level, which is why they fight it so hard. Shell Oil last year, 2 years ago, in their annual report, said that divestment had become, I'm trying to remember the phrase they used, a risk, a business, the highest order of business risk to their company, which is very good because, you know, Shell Oil is a risk to the survival of planet Earth. So this kind of work is really effective. It's now being extended, as I said, to banks and insurance companies and asset managers, the people who really fund fossil fuel expansion. And it's really important that we do that because they are, I think, more vulnerable targets, since they're as vulnerable or vulnerable in different ways. And we got to go after them. It's not easy. It's not easy to go at the heart of global capital. And I'm not sure we're going to win, but I'm sure that if we don't try, we won't win. And I think that we can make some real progress here. I hope we can.
Great. So another question here from the audience. While awaiting my opportunity to be arrested, what should I do in the next week, the next month, and the rest of this year towards fighting climate change?
Good question. Our default is to think of individual actions, and those are good. I mean, I'm glad that my house is covered with solar panels and so on, but I don't try to fool myself that that's how we're going to make the necessary change at this point. Given the time we have left, you can't make the climate math work one Tesla at a time, one vegan dinner at a time. So the most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual and join together with others in movements big enough to make change. So in the next month, find people who are fighting hard to get that infrastructure bill, the $3.5 trillion bill, to get it passed. And there's lots and lots of groups working on this now, this Build Back Better bill all over the country, and join in. Join in with a group working in your state or city around things like pension divestment, or around new clean energy standards. New York City's passed a remarkable bill that would demand retrofits of big buildings to make them energy efficient. Things like that are really important and starting to happen in lots of places. And all these things are really crucial. Just make sure that whatever you're doing is at scale enough to actually matter. Because at this point, that's what we need, leverage above all.
Thank you. So another question from the audience. We're getting through a lot. You're really doing a great job answering these. So we might be able to take 2 or 3 more questions. What is the relationship between activists and industrial unions and the modern environmentalist movement, and how can we promote a productive intersectionality?
It's a very good question, and it's not always an easy connection. The building trades unions and environmentalists have been at odds over things like building pipelines. And some of that's inherent, and one understands it, even as one is dismayed at it. What we need to keep doing is working hard on this work around a just transition and making sure that people who, through no fault of their own, are employed doing things that are no longer healthy for the earth to keep doing, have other things to do that pay them as well. And that's doable work. And in fact, it's work that Democrats have tried to do in every climate bill they've ever put forward. The Republican Party's gotten very good at holding workers hostage, as it were, and using them as their kind of, think of all those pictures of Donald Trump surrounded by coal miners in the Oval Office. The very good news is that large parts of the rest of unionism are very much joining in now in these fights for climate justice, and it's been very powerful to watch SEIU or many others play a significant role here. It will never be easy, because change is never easy, but it needs to come, and we need to make that change possible for people by allowing that just transition to be real.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I see we also have more time here. We got more time to answer questions. Great. So with how dire things are with the fate of the planet, where is the credible climate hope?
Well, look, there's no hope of stopping climate change. That's not going to happen. And truthfully, there's no guarantee that even if we do everything right at this point, we're going to get out of this in one piece. There's a huge amount of momentum in physical systems. It's not a good sign that we've lost most of the Arctic sea ice. It's not a good sign that the jet stream is misbehaving, that the Gulf Stream is slowing down. It's not a good sign that the ocean is rapidly acidifying. These are huge systems. And, each time we lose a piece, the system gets less stable. So, the fact that we're seeing record rates of deforestation in the Amazon this year, that's another really bad sign. We can't lose the Amazon. There's only one of them, Hope lies in moving very fast to stop emissions, to stop the burning of coal and gas and oil. The latest science indicates that if we manage to actually stop those emissions, it won't take long for temperatures to stabilize, albeit at elevated levels. And that actually is a bit of a change in the science, and it is good news in a sense. But we have to stop those emissions. That's very hard, and it's the key political challenge and economic challenge that we face. And if we can't do it, then there is no hope. It's an inexorable sort of suicide machine if we keep pouring carbon and methane into the atmosphere.
Okay. We were looking for hope.
Well, that's the hope, that we stop that. And there is no, Jessica, it's just a It's just a problem of physics. I mean, here's the thing. We're used in our political world to problems that A, have no finite finish line. Like, we've been arguing about healthcare as long as I've been alive in this country. And the fact that we don't get national health care is horrible, and people die and go bankrupt. But it doesn't mean that it'll be harder to do it once we finally summon the political will to do it. Climate change isn't like that. It's a time test. Once you go past certain tipping points, no one has a good plan for refreezing the Arctic. But the other thing to know about it, because it's about physics, is that it doesn't fit our usual paradigm for political maneuvering, which is based rationally on compromise. I think the minimum wage should be $30 an hour because that's what it takes to live decently. You think the minimum wage should be $0 an hour, like the guy who's running for governor in the California recall election, because you think markets solve all problems. So we meet in the middle at $15 and come back to fight it out again in a few years, right? That's how we usually work, because most political dramas are negotiations between two groups of people with different interests. There definitely are groups of people with different interests in the climate fight, but the basic negotiation here is between human beings and physics. And that's difficult because physics is poor at compromise and negotiation. It just does what it does. So having hope just means that we have some hope that we can meet the limits that physics imposes on us. And I'm hopeful because I think that we've changed the zeitgeist, the sense of what's normal and natural and obvious. The polling indicates that Americans now understand that there is a really serious problem. The question now is, can we translate that into action on a large enough scale in the short period of time that we have? And can we do it not just here, but around the world simultaneously? It's a big question. One of the reasons that that infrastructure bill is so important is that if it passes in the next month or two, then John Kerry will be able to take that news with him to the big conference, climate conference in Glasgow in November, the most important meeting except or since Paris on these topics, and use it as leverage to get China and India and others to increase the ambition of their own targets. So much hinges on it, and it's going to be tight because Prime Minister Manchin has the final say. But we will see how it comes out, and it'll come out better if we work the harder.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we have a couple more questions. Do you have any regrets in the climate fight?
Well, as I say, my biggest regret was how long it took me to figure out that we were actually in a fight instead of in an argument. And I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, so that's my default, write more books. But at a certain point, it became clear to me that, the next book wasn't really going to move the needle all that much, that we were going to have to organize too. It shouldn't be that way, frankly. And it still annoys me sometimes, I think I've been arrested 10 times now, or 11 times or something. How stupid is that? Why should somebody have to end up in handcuffs in order to get politicians to take seriously this obvious and dire warning from pretty much all the world scientists? It's dumb. But there we are. We don't live in an entirely rational world. We live in a world where vested interest is very powerful. So sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So I think that'll probably wrap us up because we're running out of time here. But thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Excellent questions. It really was a pleasure to get to talk with you. Thank you very much.
Yep, miigwech. Thank you.
Yes. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Yes, we can, if we have the courage to face what's really going on. Optimism. We have several more books to give away. I've been asked to hold up the cover. This massive tome. 100 notable books of 2020, according to the New York Times. Magisterial, meticulously researched and beautifully written, says the Oprah magazine. And I know we all take our cues on reading from the Oprah magazine. We're getting to the end of our program. We've had some interesting glitches along the way, which have kept you or spared you from some of my jokes. But now I am pleased to tell you some of our top donors tonight. We have Nick Burt in Chicago as our largest donor, Carol Kimball from Brooklyn, Jan Susler from Chicago, Alex Kane. But we still have some more books to give away, and we still have some more time to do it. So click on that donor link to support this wonderful journalism. Now, last but not least, I'm pleased to introduce our honoree. Isabel Garcia is truly a woman at the intersection. She is the daughter of labor activists and activists for Native rights, for rights at the border, a true champion for justice. She's a fourth generation Tucsonian, which is a city we have a lot of connections to in these times. She earned her law degree at the University of Arizona in 1978, and she has been fighting the good fight ever since at places like Texas Rural Legal Aid, Pima County Legal Defenders. She fought against the militarization of the border. She brought international focus on policy-driven death along the border. Among her many awards and recognitions, in 2006, Isabel was awarded the Human Rights Award from Mexico's Human Rights Commission, representing the first person not born or living in Mexico to receive the honor. In 2018, the University of Mexico honored Isabel with the Alfonso Garcia Robles Award for her decades of work in defense and promotion of human rights of migrants. And now I'm pleased to present her with one more award, In These Times Annual Activism Award. Isabel, I'm so pleased to meet you. I'm so pleased to bestow this award on you and hearing what you have to say.
Buenas noches. Congratulations on your 45 years of perseverance. I want to express our gratitude for this acknowledgement of our 45 years of work for human and community rights along the border. Being both a fifth generation and first generation Tucsonan, raised in the borderlands by a union organizer for the Mine Mill and Smelter Workers Union, two politically active parents within Tohono O'odham and Yoemi lands, and my 1976 involvement with a new immigrant rights collective, Las Mujeres en Manso. This has provided for experiences and observation that highlight the critical issues we face around the world. Environmental devastation, racism, criminalization, hyper-militarization, poverty, climate change. Violations of human and community rights are constant along our border, from the ruthless destruction of our beautiful desert to the unprecedented expansion of a brutal law enforcement agency, the Border Patrol, to the killings by the Border Patrol, to the destruction of and on indigenous lands, to the separations of thousands of children and their families, to the mass criminal prosecution and incarceration of migrants, to the death of over 35 people whose remains have been found along the Arizona-Sonora border alone since 2000, all done under both Democrat and Republican administrations. U.S. military and economic expansions and interventions in these countries, as well as the environmental devastation left behind, have propelled the very migration they love to hate. 3 decades ago, dear friend and human rights champion Maria Jimenez Presente predicted that the migrant would become the international criminal. Now the U.S. is criminally prosecuting and incarcerating hundreds of thousands of migrants for unlawful entry, with our Tucson federal court pioneering the way for the eventual separation of children. Our multi-decades long alleged war on drugs and the imposition of neoliberal economic and national security policies requires direct and indirect U.S. military and economic intervention in Mexico, Central America, and so many other countries, without regard for the communities fighting for basic respect and human rights. It is all played out along our border. Those displaced externally by the increase in carbon emissions and the climate-related events and arriving at our border encounter death and disappearance. Our battered border has witnessed the impact of both lethal border policy enforcement and the increasing temperatures and environmental devastation. An estimated 25 million people per year continue to be displaced by climate change. That's in addition to the millions fleeing other precarious conditions. We must commit to basic principles that people have a right to migrate and they have a right to remain within their healthy communities. Rather than addressing these issues meaningfully, the anti-immigrant rhetoric is spread wide and far. In the end, our biggest problem remains ignorance and lack of critical thinking. I'm grateful for the role that In These Times plays in blasting this ignorance, and thank you for your truthful attention to the border. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are blasting ignorance. Thank you so much and congratulations. Now we have a couple more books left, so you should still be donating. And we also have the announcement of our raffle winner. So the winner of a framed copy of our magnificent cover from the Black Lives Matter issue is Harry Leonardatos. Of course, it's always going to be the hard names to pronounce that are going to win. Anyway, Harry from New York, congratulations. And the winner of the trip to Spain is the very easy to pronounce John P. Connolly of Los Angeles, California. Congratulations. Yay! Now my notes read, thank you, and close the show. So I thank you very much. I invite you to tune in to inthesetimes.com for our wonderful content. I invite you to subscribe, and I invite you to continue to donate. And always, always, always fight for a better future. Thank you, and good night.